Thank you all for being here today. This is a very solemn event and one that I am glad that you're all participating in. Today is the World Day of Remembrance for road traffic victims. We join with cities all over the country in remembering the many millions killed and injured on our world's roads. We welcome their families, their friends, and many others that are affected. Locally, we remember those in our own community. The grid of 25 hearts you see on this banner represents 25 people killed in traffic crashes last year in Whatcom County. It's also a day on which we thank our emergency responders and reflect on the tremendous burden and cost of this daily continuing disaster. But this day is also an opportunity to envision a future where we don't have to suffer these tragedies. Our communities and the leaders in our communities can take action to change road safety for the better. I'd like to take just a moment to acknowledge those community leaders who are here today because they value the lives of all road users in our county. If you're elected official, appointed official, could you raise your hand? I see one. April Barker, who's here, who's on our Bellingham City Council. Thank you, April, for coming today. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your desire to make roads safer in Whatcom County. This year, the theme for World Day of Remembrance is Roads Have Stories. In just a moment, you'll hear personal stories from several members of our community. Deputy Chief Flo Simon with the Bellingham Police Department, Sgt Roger Funk with the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office, Battalion Chief Andy Day with the Bellingham Fire Department, and Tammy Brockman, the mother of Jason Brockman, a victim of a traffic crash here in Whatcom County. After our ceremony, we will be sending out officers and deputies to intervene in dangerous driving situations throughout our county. Following that, I invite you to join a commemorative walk to remember the victims of traffic crashes here in Whatcom County by carrying a candle for the person you came to remember. Now I'll invite Chief Deputy Flo Simon, who is right here, to say a few words. Sorry about that. That's all right. Move fast. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. Thank you all for being here as well. Like the mayor said, my name is Flo Simon. I'm a deputy chief for the Bellingham Police Department. I just started my 30th year with the police department. And in my career, I've been to many, many crashes, and I've also had my officers go to many, many crashes. And the theme of this year's remembrance is Roads Have Stories. And as first responders, we can all travel down a road and think, oh yeah, I remember what happened here. Oh yeah, I remember what happened here. And for me, that happens almost on a daily basis. And for today, I chose to talk about the 2100 block of Cornwall Avenue at the intersection of Virginia and Cornwall. On September 30th of 2010, there was a horrific crash there that involved a family of 4 that was crossing at an unmarked crosswalk, and a gal in a car was making a right turn, stopped for the folks in the unmarked crosswalk, and the driver behind her didn't stop and crashed into her, pushing her into the family of 4. And that day we lost a 2-year-old, and a mother was seriously injured. And so I'm sitting in my office on this day. I've been a deputy chief since 2008, so I don't get out on the road very much. But I heard this call come out, and I knew right away when a call comes out, crash involving a pedestrian and then further a crash involving a child, that it's likely not going to be a good situation. So I walked from my office over to the scene, and what I saw was chaos. You have people in grief, you have people in shock, you have students who are there's 2 schools there, Assumption and Bellingham High School, who are milling about, who have witnessed this horrific crash. And trying to bring calm to that scene was not an easy thing for the officers to do. Not only that, but I realized that there is a loss of life there. There is a family member who is grieving a loss of life. There are witnesses that need to be interviewed. There are officers who are dealing with this scene who no doubt will suffer vicarious trauma through this incident, as well as the firefighters and paramedics that were on scene. So it's an overwhelming scene, to say the least. So I think to myself, could that have been prevented? And of course I know the answer, that yes, that could have been prevented. So I want to spend a minute maybe talking about distracted driving and how that's come to be caused 25% of all motor vehicle fatalities caused by distracted driving. And I'm not talking about talking on your cell phone. I'm talking about looking at your navigation system, taking your hands off the wheel. If you drive from point A to point B and you don't really remember how you get there, you're distracted driving. I find myself doing that when I drive down the freeway. I'll drive from Bellingham to Olympia, and I'm like, I don't remember passing Seattle. So I really have to try to focus on what's ahead of me on the road. So people that put their makeup on in their cars, people that shave in their cars, those are all forms of distracted driving. And what I'd like to see the folks in Bellingham do, and all across the country, is really focus on hands on the wheel, looking out in front of you, and also teaching those kids that are in your car, because they ride in your car when they're toddlers, and they watch mom and dad talking on their phone, playing on their phones, doing whatever they're doing, and they pick up that same habit. And having a toddler myself now, I find myself wanting to reach for my phone and going, nope, you can't do it, I can't do it. So it's been a learning curve for me as well. But every time I think I'm going to reach over for it, I do remember that crash at 2100 Cornwall, and I do remember that my actions can take somebody else's life in the blink of an eye. And so what do I do to help reduce that distracted driving? You know, they've pretty much taken away all my arrest powers as deputy chief. You don't get to do a lot of that kind of stuff. You don't get to do a lot of law enforcement anymore. But the two things that I do stop people for on a regular basis is distracted driving. If you're talking on your cell phone, I will pull you over and I'll have a little conversation with you. And if you're not wearing your seatbelt, I'll also pull you over. So just, be aware out there. Pay attention to your habits. Pay attention to what you're teaching, what we are teaching our children who are coming up behind us. And let's try to reduce that number and save lives. Thank you.
A little taller. Sorry. Hi there. My name is Roger Funk, and I'm a sergeant with the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office. I started with the Sheriff's Office in 1996 and really been blessed with a great career. I've done a lot of different things. The highlight of my career is not what I'm doing today, but what I did for 11 years, and that was to work in our traffic unit. In our traffic unit, I conducted collision investigations every day. I did enforcement all the time. And unfortunately, in that position, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, one of my responsibilities was to be called out whenever necessary, whenever there was a fatality on a county road. Any fatality on a county road required somebody from the traffic unit to respond day or night. So we'd get those calls in the middle of the night, and whenever dispatch called me in the middle of the night, it was never good news. What I want to talk about today is the connection that we as officers make, as deputies make. I was reminded of this early on in my traffic career because a cousin of mine called me. She called me up just frantic. She was crying hysterically, and I thought, oh my God, something really bad happened. I talk to her once a year around Christmas time when the family gets together, and that's it, and now she's calling me. So she told me that she'd been in a crash. I'm like, okay, calm down, take a breath, and she goes on to tell me about how her car got hit, and the person had left, and she was in the store when it happened. She wasn't even in the car. So this very, very minor traffic crash that we as officers go every day to and just take our reports and move on, business is just another day, for her was a major life incident. And that is something small. So imagine as things escalate, as we get to serious injury or fatalities, how impactful that can be, and how important it is for us as officers to show compassion and kindness when we do that. I don't really think about how I interact with people. I just try to do that every day. And I investigated a crash one time, and I dealt with this lady who had been hit head on. Her car burst into flames, and she had been yanked out of the car, and her life was saved by somebody. And she saw me later, and she goes, you know what helped me the most that day is when you came up to me and said, hi, I'm Roger, I'm your deputy for the day. I'm like, well, I didn't even know I said that. But I did something that'll lighten it up just a little bit and make her just feel a little bit more centered as we moved along. Another crash that I had, this guy was riding a motorcycle and he hit a deer. Went down, no fault of his own, a deer came out and got him, and he went down. He stood up when I arrived, came up, shook my hand, and says, "You saved my life." I'm like, well, geez, I don't know what I did. I wasn't even here. Well, a week ago, I'd written him a ticket for wearing one of those little helmets that are more of a toy than a protective device, and he really didn't like me that day, but he went and bought himself a full-face helmet. And he says I treated him with respect and kindness, and he's made him realize how important it was. So he went out and got a real helmet, and he contributed that to saving his life. But the next story is the one that probably means the most to me, this little bell. I responded to a fatality motorcycle crash south end of Lake Whatcom, and this gentleman was riding with a bunch of friends and his fiance, and right in front of his fiance, he was in a motorcycle crash, and he lost his life. I investigated that crash with the same compassion I always try to show without really thinking about it, just trying to be the person that I always try to be. Finished my business, wrote my report, went about my life. Fast forward about a year later, I get asked by dispatch to make a phone call. So I pulled over to a parking lot next to a grassy area, and I pulled my cell phone out of my tank bag on my motorcycle, and I make the call. And a lady comes running up to me and just looks at me. I said, "I'll be with you in a second, I'm on the phone." So she waited very patiently while I finished the phone. And when I got off the phone, she came up and she gave me a hug, and she gave me this bell. She says, "I pray for you every day since I met you." Like, I don't remember meeting you. She goes, "Well, I lost my fiance a year ago, and you were the deputy that responded. And you were so kind, and you made a horrible situation just a little bit better. And I pray for you every day." And on this bell is St. Michael. It's a patron saint for law enforcement. And so I've kept that. It's a good luck bell for motorcycles, but I didn't want to put it on my motorcycle because I want to risk losing it. So that's all I have to say is just for the officers here, remember you can have a huge impact on everybody's lives, from the smallest of incidents, the smallest of traffic stops. You don't know what that's going to do and the impact that it's going to make. So thank you.
Elected officials, community members, fellow responders, friends, family, I'd like to thank you for coming tonight on behalf of the women and men of the Bellingham Fire Department. My name is Andy Day. I'm one of the battalion chiefs. We're responsible for organizing our response of our 8 stations on a daily basis. Some of the crews are here tonight. So we routinely go on traffic incidents. Few, if any of us here this evening have been untouched by the impact of a traffic crash. We as responders have also suffered the loss of loved family members and friends. We share your sadness. Tonight, in addition to acknowledging the devastation and suffering caused by traffic crashes, I'd like to take a couple of moments to also acknowledge the positive strides our country has made in reducing traffic fatalities over the last half century. I grew up in Wyoming in the 1960s. With a sparse population, we routinely drove vast distances over high rates of speed in the process of our everyday lives. Our family car was, not surprisingly, a station wagon, a 1957 Ford Country Squire with the Western-themed brands on the seat. It was one of the first cars to have seat belts as standard equipment. Not that my sister and I got to use those seat belts, as in a family of 6, we were more often on the back deck, sprawled out on top of the luggage, singing our favorite song. 70, 80, 95, that's the way we like to drive. It's a wonder we survived. Traffic crashes were frequent and deadly in those days. But in 1966, the tide began to turn with the enactment of the National Traffic and Motor Safety Vehicle Act. This act was responsible for an array of life-saving features that we take for granted today, including seat belts, headrests, energy-absorbing steering wheels, and shatter-resistant windshields. The positive impact on fatality rates was quick and dramatic. Adding to the act was the establishment of the National Highway Transportation Administration in the early 70s, which led to requirements for such things as airbags, anti-lock brakes, and the establishment of emergency medical service systems to render quick and effective life support for victims of car crashes. In Bellingham and Whatcom County, Instead of relying on a patchwork of providers, including funeral homes and private ambulances, you now have hundreds of EMTs, dozens of paramedics, and a fleet of over 60 ambulances strategically placed throughout our county to serve you. In my 40 years in the fire service in Whatcom County, I have responded to literally thousands of motor vehicle crashes. Interestingly, it's amazing to me to see crashes that once would have likely resulted in death or serious injury, causing far less severe impact due to the improved vehicle design I've mentioned. Unfortunately, with the epidemic in distracted driving, combined with the continued scourge of impaired drivers, our roads are increasingly dangerous, especially to pedestrians and cyclists. The work is not done. Thank you to the agencies in partnership with the Traffic Safety Commission for their efforts in providing education, information, and enforcement towards responsible driving. A special thank you to Doug Dahl for organizing this event. Be careful out there and continue to drive, walk, and ride defensively. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tammy Brockman, and I want to share with you tonight about an 18-year-old young man who was very selfless and humble and sweet and giving. His name was Jason, and he unconditionally loves everybody he meets. He accepts everyone he meets. He's always glad to help anyone that's hurting or has a special need. He even chose to volunteer at the Lighthouse Mission for his senior project. He's a strong student athlete, and he's the hardest working person I've probably ever met in my life. He has a smile and personality that really lights up a room and brings a lot of joy to those around him. On Friday, March 4th, 2011, Jason went to visit a friend and play video games on the Pole Road, just 2 blocks from his own house on the Old Guide Road. He was simply walking on the side of that wide, straight road when he was hit behind by an inattentive driver of a truck. Jason sustained fatal injuries from this senseless, violent, and very preventable impact. Jason is my son. His death was very devastating, and it traumatized me deeply. I just didn't know if I could survive. I experienced an indescribable gut-wrenching pain, and I literally could not catch my breath. The most important part of my life, raising and protecting my 2 precious sons, had been wiped out in an instant. I cried every day for at least a year, if not 2. And I miss Jason desperately, even 7.5 years later. I'll never be over this. I won't move on. But I move forward the best I can. And I am very dedicated to living my life more intentionally and a lot more deliberately than I did before. Many people continue to share with us how their lives have been deeply impacted and positively impacted by the way Jason lived his life and how he loved others in those 18 years. He only lived in Whatcom County for 4.5 years, but he made hundreds of relationships. Songs, poems, art, and photos have been published about him. Contributions have been given in his name to local libraries, schools, sports teams, churches, hospitals. A U.S. flag was recently flown for him in Afghanistan by our troops. There was a sock drive in September in his name to carry on his legacy of giving to the Lighthouse Mission. A bench was recently placed for him at Whatcom Falls, which was one of his favorite places, on the playground. Also, there's benches and pavers at Peace Island Hospital on San Juan Island, where his grandparents live, and a Methodist church in Utah, even. He chose to be an organ and tissue donor, and in the first year after his passing, 143 individuals in 27 states and Mexico had their health restored or lives saved because of those donations. We continue to support donation efforts and events in our state and beyond, and I've been active in a lot of multiple grief support groups that have sprung up locally and nationally, and various events. And I just really try to reach out with letters and cards and calls to the recently bereaved in terms of parents. I try to let them know that they will survive, they can survive, even if it doesn't feel like that's the case in the moment. Jason was a promoter of peace and forgiveness, and he taught me a lot about life and love, and that seems kind of ironic because the parent's supposed to teach the child. Some of the things he taught me were to not get so worked up about things and to let more things go, to not hold a grudge, to hold your friends and family tightly at all times and be very loyal and committed to them, to work hard, to stay the course, to have fun, to laugh, to be in the moment, to be humble, to be gracious, and to share what you have and who you are with others around you. Jason was a professed Christian, and I know that one day I will see him again, and that brings me hope for today. And before I close, I'd like to reiterate some of the other things that you've shared. Please slow down and pay attention to the road when you're driving. It only takes a fraction of a second to be distracted in some way, whether you glance at your cell phone or you straighten your rug underneath your feet or you engage with the passenger in the seat next to you, brush your hair, whatever. It can cause irreparable damage, and that probably nanosecond. And all of us, myself included, have, at one time or another been distracted in some way and taken our eyes off the road and veered off our course or to the side of the road. So I am really serious about that, and thank you for listening to my message and for helping save lives.
I'm Carl Lanham. I'm the traffic sergeant for the city of Bellingham. Tonight also represents the kickoff for our distracted driving grant. This is a grant that's been provided by the Washington State Traffic Safety Commission Target Zero program. And of course, Target Zero is meant for 0 deaths in Whatcom County. The dedicated patrol tonight is dedicated to those victims we have in Whatcom County. Participating in the directed patrol tonight is going to be the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office, the Ferndale Police Department, the Washington State Patrol, and the Bellingham Police Department. And before I release them to go to their cars to get ready for the patrol, I would like to invite those people here that would like to do the memorial walk to please come forward and get a candle. There's a heart there and pencils. You can write your name of the person that you would like to walk in memory of. And if you guys can gather next to the motorcycles and wait for the patrol cars to leave, and I'll signal for the patrol cars to leave to go on to the patrol, and then you guys will be escorted on your memorial walk. So at this time, if I can get the patrol officers to head to their cars, turn on the emergency lights, and for those patrol officers that are going out there, please be careful out there. Thank you.